Well, we're going to start out with a story from 2 Kings. It's in chapter 4. We're going to be reading about Elisha and the widow woman. So, we're reading verses 1 through 7. And it talks about there was the wife of a son of the prophets who cried to Elisha. And she said, "Your servant, my husband, he's dead. And you know that he feared the Lord, but the creditor, he's coming to take my 2 sons to be his slaves." And Elisha said to her, "What shall I do for you? Tell me, what have you of value in your house?" She said, "I have nothing in the house except for a jar of oil." He said, "Go and borrow vessels from all your neighbors, empty vessels, and not just a few. And when you come in the house, shut the door upon yourself and your sons, and pour out the oil you have into all of those vessels, setting each one aside when it's full." So she went, she shut the door on herself and her sons. They brought the vessels as she poured the oil. When they were all full, she said to her son, "Bring me another vessel." And he said, There's none left." Then the oil stopped multiplying. She came and told the man of God, and he said, "Go sell the oil and pay your debt, and you and your sons can live on the rest." So in this story, this woman had a problem. She had a big debt, and her sons were going to be taken into slavery in order to pay off the debt. She didn't have a way to make money because back in the Bible times, the women didn't have jobs. They were provided for by their husbands and their sons. And if they lost their husband, they didn't really have anyone to provide for them except for their sons. And this woman was in extra trouble because they had a lot of debt when her husband died. And so she was going to lose everything. So then she saw the man of God in Elisha, and she cried out for help. He also, when he asked her what she had, she answered back that she had something. Even though it wasn't enough for the debt, it wasn't, a little jar of oil, that was going to do almost nothing for being able to pay off the debt and keep her sons out of slavery. But she did answer that she had it. She had to know that she had a seed. She knew that even though she didn't have everything she needed, she had a little bit. She had a jar of oil she could do something with. Then she was told to borrow containers from her neighbors, to find some empty vessels, to ask neighbors, and not just to grab a few. So she had to go out to all of her neighbors and try to get something. It was up to her how much effort she was going to put into it. She could have stopped after going to one neighbor and saying, "Hey, do you have a jar I can borrow?" And then once she got it, it'd been like, "Okay, well, that's enough. I've only got this little jar of oil. It's not going to do much, so why do I need all these empty vessels? I'll just grab one." But instead, she went to as many neighbors as she could, gathering vessels. Elisha told her to shut herself in the house, to shut the door on just her and her sons. The reason he did that is because he wanted them to avoid distractions. He didn't want people to be looking in and saying, "What are you doing? Why do you have all these empty vessels? You just have a little small thing of oil. That's not going to do anything." But instead, he had them shut themselves away so that they weren't distracted, so they didn't have people telling them what they could or couldn't do. And instead, they put their faith out, believing that God was going to do a miracle, that he was going to multiply. The other thing she had to do was she had to take a step of faith in pouring out the oil that she did have. When she had all those empty vessels, they didn't just instantly fill up and, all of a sudden she had all these full vessels. She had to keep pouring out what she had in the small vessel in order to fill up the bigger vessels. You know, she had to give the thing that she had of the little jar of oil, and she had to give that out in order for God to multiply it and fill up the big vessels. And in the end, once she had done all that, her needs were met. She was able to sell off all that extra oil and get the debt paid off. She was able to keep her sons from having to go to slavery. And there was enough extra that she could live the rest of her life on the money that she made with that. Her and her sons were provided for from there on after. You know, so not only was the first need met, because the first need she had was keeping her sons from going into slavery. She had to pay off a debt. But she had another need that she never even told the prophet about. And that need was a way to be provided for in the future, because she didn't have that either. So God not only met one need, but he met all of her needs. So, you know, it's important that we know that we have something we can give. Even if it seems like it's really small, we have to know we have something of value. Then we have to actually offer that seed. We can't hold it and just expect that God's going to multiply out of nothing. We have to put that first seed in. We have to take the step of giving it to God so that he can multiply it. You know, and sometimes it takes continuing to give out. You know, when she didn't just pour the little jar out and then it was all done. She had to keep pouring it out. It had to keep on going out so it could multiply. We have to remember to keep ourselves away from distraction. When we're believing that God's going to do something for us, we have to ignore all of the people who would say otherwise. We can't listen to the people who doubt that it's going to happen. We just have to keep believing. And so sometimes we have to kind of isolate ourselves and just press into God for the miracle without worrying about if other people think it's crazy, that it can never happen. We just have to remember what God has told us, what we've been told about the miracle that's coming. And we have to be ready for the multiplication. We have to, you know, when the woman was told to go grab the empty vessels from her neighbors, she had to take steps to make herself ready to receive that multiplication. If she didn't grab those vessels, there'd be nothing for her to receive all the new oil in. You know, God could multiply that oil that she poured out of the jar, but if she hadn't grabbed those empty ones, she would have just been pouring oil out on the floor and wasting it. But so she had to make herself ready to receive what God was going to give her. We can see in the Bible all the promises that God has made to us, that he will multiply what we give. So we need to be ready for what is going to happen. We need to know that when we give, it's going to be multiplied when it comes back to us. And so we need to make sure we're taking steps to be ready for that. You know, for us, some of those steps look like, you know, making sure that if God gives us something, that we're not going to be stingy with it. We got to make sure if he gives us the things we're asking for, that they're not going to cause us to turn away from him. You know, because what if I were to ask God really hard that he brings me in a new video game? I'm like, God, please, I really want this new video game console. Can you please give it to me? What if he gives it to me, and then I spend so much time playing video games that I never read my Bible, that I never pray? God's not going to want to give it to me then, because it's going to cause me to not pay attention to him. So we got to make sure that when we're asking God to do things for us and to multiply us, that we're ready to receive that those things aren't going to cause us to turn away from God. And we got to know that, you know, Malachi 3:10, it said that God's going to open up the floodgates of heaven and pour out a blessing that we don't even have room enough to receive. So we know that he's going to pour out blessing upon us when we give. So we make ourselves ready by having as big of a cup as possible to receive as much of that blessing as we can and realize that it's going to keep flowing, that it doesn't end just one time, that this happens every time we give, that we can always put our faith out for multiplication.